Welcome to the State Smash podcast. This is going to be episode 1 of yet another anarchist podcast because you needed yet another anarchist podcast in your life, and I am going to bring it to you twice a week. It's going to be available on timetofree.us, my platform that you can join if you are into that, where it'll be an anarchist hub of basically anything that people want to post related to how effectively to end the state. And the State Smash podcast will be sponsored by Liberty Mugs. Liberty Mugs is your source for printed libertarian mugs, and has variability. You can contact them if you want your design on a mug. It's good stuff done by good people. Now, like, just to do some housekeeping before the first episode of State Smash, you will be able to find this on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher once I get the approval. But I do not have the podcast set up as of yet, as of the 17th of April, 2018, which is when I'm recording this, because you have to have several episodes up, I think. And either way, this is starting out as a live recording, so you won't be able to find it yet. But when it is available, I will be able to send out a link, and you should be able to access it as, in any format you want on any device you want to access it on. So that out of the way, because I think that should be dealt with by probably Saturday when I get a couple episodes up. This is going to be episode 1. I am interviewing an anti-war combat veteran. He was a rifleman in the USMC, and he's seen combat, which some people have not. So he should have a fairly interesting perspective. Mind introducing yourself and saying, where people can find you in case they can't finish this cast right now?
Absolutely. My name's Matthew King. You can find me at Sanletat, spelled Sansletat. I've got a website, withoutthestate.org. I'm still working on content for that. I'm also on Steemit at Mr. Smee 360. That's MR for Mr. And Patreon, the same tag. And if I could just say, most veterans have not seen combat. Actual combat. So just to clarify things, not that I'm glorifying myself, but just to show that I can offer a unique perspective on this subject of anarchism and anti-war.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because you mentioned that in the chat before the show. Basically, most of the combat veterans that I have spoken to that have been willing to speak to me have been more receptive to the more extreme anarchist ideas because they've seen it up close and personal. They've been in the teeth of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a good distinction, and there's no glory necessary in like realizing that you were part of the problem. I mean, that to me is the opposite of glorification, and it's really good that you mentioned that.
Right. I could think of 10 different ways we can take this rabbit hole of the perspective of someone who's been in the machine, who's been part of the machinations of the state, and tying that into anarchism. But I believe you wanted to start with how I got to that point. Is that right?
Well, I want to start with who you were before you went in. Like, what convinced you to join?
Right. Growing up, didn't have any political or religious leanings whatsoever. I was very neutral in that regard. My parents just had me very focused on school, but I didn't really have a direction. So they put me into junior ROTC. I went willingly, of course. It seemed, romantic and appealing, and thinking I would join the military and it would be cool or whatever. I did very well at the junior ROTC stuff way back. Graduated high school back in 2006. Went to boot camp for the Marine Corps when I was 17, specifically to be a rifleman in the infantry. And I was just naive. I didn't have any opinion about the wars that were going on at that time, Afghanistan and Iraq. So I just kind of went for it. in retrospect, it was a rite of passage, just a coming into manhood, if you will, just having really no philosophical understanding of anything, existentialism or purpose. That's, in retrospect, that's what it was to me. I went to Afghanistan in 2009 for the big push. Thanks, Obama. Operation Strike of the Sword was the name of that operation. Now, there's an important detail that's part of this story. My platoon, which is about 25 guys, and another platoon, we were sent in to this area that was only occupied by British Royal Marines, and they didn't really patrol out very far on foot, mind you, maybe 1 kilometer. So essentially, we were in more or less uncharted territory, just riddled with Taliban. So anyway, 2 platoons were sent in 10 days prior to this big operation. It was a brigade level, which is just massive, thousands of Marines. And the intent was for us to be bait, essentially. They called it a feint operation. So we were to go toe-to-toe with the Taliban and make them think that only 60 or so guys are landing, and they would be able to hang with us, so to speak. And we did go toe-to-toe with them. They weren't very good at what they did, except for the IEDs. Those are obviously incircumnavigable. You just, half the time you don't know when they're there. Firefights, they're rather cowardly, but that's besides the point. So 10 days in, the main brigade lands, and they pretty much dispersed after that. For the most part, there were still casualties after that. Our platoon, of course, was one of the ones that were experiencing some of this stuff. I'll forego a lot of the details. It's not really appropriate for this context. But there wasn't really time to think during the deployment, to reflect on what was happening. We were just constantly going. We really didn't have anything. We didn't have, air conditioning and hot food, and it was not nice. It was not the typical, and no offense to you Army guys who were who had it rough, but the cliche with Marines is that the Army really has it easy, and they don't know how easy they have it. We had no luxuries, really, sleeping under the stars on the ground for mostly 7 months. So when I got back, it was rough for a couple of years, just psychologically speaking. It was very rough. Went through a really rough time, and I realized that the feint operation that I mentioned, where we were essentially the bait for 10 days, that was the sort of a turning point after the fact, when I realized we're just a number. This is very cliche, but it's true. We were just a number. We were just being used for this massive, widely misunderstood foreign policy. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it. We could get much more philosophical with that. I know you can as well.
Yep.
So to where I am now, I just I had some anarchist friends in Seattle, where I used to live. They really turned me onto these ideologies. I don't want to call it an ideology, but let's call it that for now. Started getting into various things on YouTube, documentaries. Even InfoWars was much more anti-establishment than they had become recently, given this last election. Then I started getting into a little bit of literature. I haven't had time to get deep into literature, but certain things like The Market for Liberty, for example, from Mises, it's a good example of what allowed me to see how an anarchist society could work in a very pragmatic way. It really breaks things down. Have you had a chance to read that by chance?
Not that one, no.
Okay. It's excellent, really good. When people ask, well, how would this work? How would that work? Who would build the roads, right? They break that down to every minute detail, and it's mental torture, but it's great. More recently, certain inspirations like Julia Turiansky, Brave the World is her handle, and Cody Wilson is another one. He takes anarchism into a whole new dimension. He even, I hate to say this, but he even takes postmodernism into and applies it to anarchism. It's very interesting. So that's pretty much where I am now. I'm trying to be an investigative journalist for regarding human rights violations and government corruption all around the world. That's what I'd really like to get into. That's what I'm allegedly studying for, but they don't really teach that at the schools. So that's about
Well,
it.
yeah, they wouldn't want to teach about human rights violations. That would make a lot of the other stuff that they try to pump up as positive seem a lot less positive.
Right, right. Well, when you start getting into exposing how human rights are violated, and then it links back to the progressive establishment. Not to get all left right on you, but this is the thing that's really happening. Yeah, then these progressive institutions, they will absolutely shut you down, as we've seen so many times.
Well, and of course they'll shut you down because they want to see people conform to an ideology that makes them good tax cattle. I mean, realistically, um, Japan was a travesty. It was huge carnage on a scale that had never been seen before. And like the U.S. gets to call everybody else crazy when the U.S. was the only one to use nukes.
Mm-hmm.
Miss me with that. Um, and I want to get some perspective on what the JROTC program was like.
Uh, it, it, some people, I could see they would think it's like they're training you to want to kill brown people in sandy countries. Just to get that off the table, that's not it at all. Not that you were thinking that. Uh, it was essentially just a leadership course. That was really the foundation of it. It was just how to be a leader. But then they would apply that to a military setting. A lot of drilling, memorization of all kinds of stuff, movements and whatnot, how to move physically in unison with other people. Um, but at its core, it was leadership, and I did gain a lot from the leadership aspects of that course. That's really it. It was pretty relatively benign.
And on that level, because you mentioned leadership, uh, is it basically then essentially like sort of an intro to the idea of boot camp? Is it like similar to it but much lighter?
In some aspects, yeah, yeah, they do get you accustomed to that environment to a degree, but ultimately, nothing can, very little can really prepare you for boot camp. But I would say it did help me a little bit. But again, it really focuses on mostly just leadership in a military setting, but you can take the leadership lessons and apply it anywhere in life, even in an anarchist or anti-war community.
All right, and so you mentioned that you were part of an operation under what, the Obama administration,
Yes.
and under that administration, how was the sentiment? What was the sort of vibe of the people on the ground? Did they feel connected to the administration or not?
No, no. Honestly, we're very far removed from politics. And mind you, I think I was 20 when I deployed, and from 17 to 20, I was just in active duty in the Marine Corps. So I was basically still in high school, mentally speaking. Just so no, there were no politics was really involved. In fact, I didn't know who we were even really fighting at the time. Perhaps if I'd followed the news, I would know. But at that time, I was completely ignorant of what was happening. It was purely just, honestly, just a kind of a brutal indoctrination, as far as how we regard the enemy. There was no, and this is classical for war, that there's no regard for the opposition as being human. They're just simply a symbol or an object that we have to kill. Uh, and the word "kill," I couldn't tell you how many times that was repeated throughout this whole 4 years.
So basically, they sort of numbed you to the idea so that you could do it more effectively.
Yes, precisely, exactly, without hesitation. And another concept that goes in line with that is their definition of discipline. The military definition, as far as I can recall, is not that they have their own dictionary per se, but it's instant, willing obedience to orders. So yes, to be numb and to act without hesitation. That's right. And of course, that concept is to save your life and the lives of those around you. But in a macrocosm, it's much bigger than that. It's because you're a disposable number.
Yeah. Well, and on that level, it's to get you to ignore because when you're in the teeth of it, I imagine that it has a whole lot of pressures that you wouldn't experience elsewhere. and that those pressures might get you to think more in the moment and more about that moment than the greater impact of your actions, because it's not like you can plan that sort of thing out, especially with IEDs everywhere.
Right, right. Yeah, you just have to go for it. I mean, one of the things they literally train us to do is just to go directly towards where the fire is coming from, and it's effective. It works. If they're shooting at you, I mean, there's a strategy to get to where they are. Of course, there's a way to do it, but you go straight for them. So hesitation in those moments can get people killed, and I can say firsthand that my squad leader, who is just can I swear, by the way?
Oh yeah. This is
Okay.
If people couldn't swear, this would be a very short podcast, because anarchy is not about controlling words. It's about freeing minds and ideas. Yeah, swear all you want.
All right. So my squad leader was a crazy sick fuck, but if he hadn't acted without hesitation and one particular instance brought us directly to where the enemy was at this particular building, then we would have been sitting ducks. So it was stupid, and I'm surprised none of us in our squad in that moment got shot. We were wide open. But so the training, there's a dual purpose there. There is a practicality to it, but yeah, ultimately it's just to make us killing machines.
Yeah, and in that regard, by the way, because I know that there are some things that veterans can't talk about, but in terms of making you into a number, how many of your, like, I guess, platoon mates felt similarly to the way you do about basically being thrown into what seems like a meat grinder to be consumed by somebody else?
I wish I could give them kept in touch with many of them, even though I feel like I truly feel inside that if we were to all meet again, we would be like brothers, like we're back in 2009. I really have only kept in touch with one, and I know that he feels the same way for a fact. He was one of the few that was very empathetic. Well, I don't want to say empathetic, but he thought about the situation a bit more broadly than the others. I haven't taken the time to try to get a hold of my other squad mates. It's really it was easier to forget and move on and just start a new life.
Right. Yeah. But by the way, thank you to you and any other veteran who's willing to come on this program and discuss these things, because it can't be easy to relive. I mean, there's a lot that goes into, trying to clear your mind of that sort of shit later, trying to reverse the indoctrination and what impact it had on your decisions. So, and I definitely appreciate your being willing to go public with some of these things, with your feelings here.
But I appreciate the platform and this opportunity. To go back to the difficulty of being able to speak about something like this, people process things differently. Two guys can be side by side and they take it totally differently, psychologically speaking. What was his name? Sebastian Younger, I believe is his name. Yeah, he writes about this in Tribe. Well, I don't know about this specifically, but at least at a TED Talk, I'm sorry, I accidentally plugged his book, but in a TED Talk, he spoke about the effects of long-term PTSD, or rather instances of long-term PTSD and short-term PTSD. And generally speaking, long-term PTSD is a bit of a myth. The VA has a broken system in which if you don't get better, they keep giving you money. If you do get better, they stop giving you money. So it's ass backwards. So a lot of veterans they're able to get better, but there's always some residual effects. There's always stuff that's going to affect you. I mean, get me drunk and just see how I fall apart. It's not good. But anyway, I'm getting astray here.
I don't think so. I think that, like, I think that people don't recognize what they're going to get into. You know, I mean, to bring it back to like who you were before, I'm sure that you were inundated by all the recruitment posters in high school, all the ads that made you just look like a badass, that didn't show anybody dying, didn't, you know, there's no smell-o-vision, you can't smell the stink when the babbles release.
Yeah.
There's no comparison to being actually there.
Yeah, and the stink. Yeah, that is real. Absolutely. I'm sure you've talked to some of your friends and acquaintances. Yeah. Part of it was really some friends in high school who they were senior to me, and they had joined, and a good number of them had joined the infantry and the Marine Corps, and I felt compelled to follow suit, just like this very romanticized idea of war. And that's the problem, is that it's romanticized and it shouldn't be. And I think you might have mentioned this in your video. What was the name of the video that we just mentioned earlier that you did?
Oh yeah, I did this video. If any of y'all want to go check it out, it was my first video recorded on a shitty Microsoft Surface tablet, and like in the middle of the desert somewhere. I just got really angry at Veterans Day because it's basically just a corporate bullshit platform. But it's called International Anti-War Day because I wanted Veterans Day to start being called that.
And this correlates with your video, and your video was well done, and it well represents my perspective. We need to stop romanticizing war, stop stigmatizing the critique of veterans. I'll say, and this pisses a lot of veterans off, I'm not. I don't want people to thank me. I really don't. I don't take that to heart. When they thank me, it means nothing to me. We need to, in fact, stop all support for veterans, saying I'm against the war, but I support the troops. No, stop supporting the troops too. Be understanding of their situation, but don't put that magnet or that bumper sticker on your car and say, well, I support guys going to war. No, just don't do it. Withdraw all consent for it.
Well, and of course, if you support the troops, what you're not saying is support the troops. What you're really saying is support the war effort, because the troops, the best way to support them would be to stop, you know, making pawns to send over in, you know, in these worthless conflicts, at least worthless to the common man. And, you know, to realize the human potential to interconnect rather than to destroy. That would be supporting the troops, but then it wouldn't be supporting troops, and you wouldn't get to feel like you were part of something vicariously, because that's what it really is. It's fucking cowardice. If you support the troops, then what you're really saying is, I'm not over there, but I definitely support the idea of somebody being over there, just not me. And, you know, so please take my money so that those other people can be over there doing the awful stuff. And I won't think about it. I wash my hands of it. America.
and most of them are just naive kids, you know,
Yeah.
17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who just don't know anything about the world. I mean, saying you're against the war, but you support the troops, you're still kind of supporting the war by supporting the troops. And thereby you're supporting killing a lot of innocent people, women, children. I mean, drone strikes. Jeremy Scahill, for example, he did the Assassination Complex. It was this sort of a book and this very dynamic website. Something that he points out is that 90% of the victims of drone strikes are civilians. I mean, and airstrikes, basically the same thing. It's absurd. So we also need to think about people over there, not just here. You know, that's a huge aspect of it.
Well, right. I mean, because if 9/11 happens, that's a travesty. But everybody forgets or just doesn't know about the bombing of the Sudanese pharmaceutical factory under Clinton that resulted in the deaths of 30,000 people.
Right.
And so people don't consider their impact on shit.
Right. And on impact, there was a guy that I've spent many nights crying about in the past, particularly, you know, the couple of years after the war. But you know, this sort of emotion doesn't go away. There was a guy that we killed. He was an enemy combatant, but let's be realistic. He was a young guy. He probably had no future, and he was probably not even ideologically indoctrinated into the Taliban's way of doing things. They provided a paycheck and safety for his family, or if he became a martyr, then his family would get paid. So he and I are, in a manner of speaking, I never knew his name, but we're parallel. We're the same. I could tie this into Lysander Spooner. Are you familiar with him by chance?
Oh yeah, Lysander Spooner wrote the No Treason. That's a great series.
Yes, yeah. He and I'll do my best to summarize this. You may be able to do a better job, but he likened the ballot to a bullet. Both sides of the ballot and the bullet, they're opposing sides, and they're not really involved willingly. Even if you weren't conscripted, but you enlisted of your own volition, you're still coerced and basically tricked because of your naivete. You're tricked into being into that situation, and you're thrust into this conflict with someone else, and you have to cast the bullet before he casts one back at you. And it's the exact same thing with casting a ballot. In both instances, it's force and coercion.
Yeah, and that's a good summary there. And like, I suspect, this is just a suspicion. I don't have anything to back this up necessarily, but I'd love to get somebody from Infinity Ward to talk about it. I suspect that the reason Call of Duty is allowed to thrive in the way it is, the reason these war video games are allowed to thrive in the way that they are, even though they depict war as something corrupt and terrible, and they have all these quotes from all these anti-war people, is because people don't pay attention to the quotes about how terrible it is, and they don't pay attention to the politics of the game. When you're in the moment, and when you've got unlimited health, basically, when you don't have to worry about your leg falling off and watching your partner's intestines spill out, when you don't have to worry about basically what war is, when you can be detached from it, it can put you in a headspace, like all these war movies, where you think that it'll be fine and I'll just go over there and be a better soldier. And a lot of these people probably are like heavily recruited by this barrage of pro-military games. It wouldn't surprise me if that was something, the pro-military games, movies, music, all these things were just recruitment tools, even the ones that really showed something gritty, because people disconnect. They're not willing to look at the person as the same as them. They just want to think of them as an NPC.
An NPC, yeah. I believe Infinity Ward and maybe some of these other massive companies actually met with the Pentagon or other official entities. Now, I don't know if they were collaborating for advice or if there was something else included. As you stated, as you implied, it's basically a form of indoctrination.
Oh yeah. And of course, when people get there, they realize that it's going to be a little bit harder than just pulling triggers and pushing buttons.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, like, they don't feel as though they were given the proper information. It's not like they were given a good deal of contract. You will deal with PTSD for 3 years after you get out. They don't think about that. They just think, I want to go in, I want to get a paycheck, I want to get easier time in college, I want to get, all of these other things. They don't think about, I want to go to war, for the most part. And these sorts of vicarious experiences, I think, make them more okay with the concept of going to war, even though they won't understand what war is until they're there.
Right. And how do we overcome companies like this that are indoctrinating children into this romanticized version of war? And even when they get to the age of where they're realizing that, if they're enlisting, that they actually are going to go to war, a lot of people actually do accept it and they almost want it. I actually have a couple of housemates here who are reservists in the Marine Corps, and they're all about it. They want to go, and no matter how much I talk to them, they're still. I get it. It's a rite of passage, and I can't. There's nothing I can do to dissuade them from desiring that rite of passage. It's interesting, but how do we get rid of this systematic indoctrination? I mean, besides boycotting it, raising awareness, doing what you're doing, I suppose that's a start.
Well, I think it's more like, because watching something like this or listening to it if you're on your phone, like listening to us talk on your way to work or whatever, I think that's part of it, but I think the primary part of it is being willing to talk about this sort of thing to your neighbors. I always say at the end of my e-radio show, Moment of Rage, I always say well, almost always, sometimes I forget. I always say educate your neighbors. Educate your friends, educate anybody you care about, anybody you want to see thrive, because basically the information is what's key. I mean, you mentioned Alex Jones. I used to be into him before I realized that basically he was a shill for whatever politician seemed to be spewing something parallel to what he was spewing. But his analysis of the Bilderberg Group is one of the things that got me to realize that all these corporations and military and fucking non-governmental organizations and political campaigns and everybody, they're all connected. They all have representatives at various tables, Bilderberg being only one of them. And they all have, very specific keyed in interests. And it's getting people to realize that. It's getting people to step away from the paradigm on a personal level and step far enough away from it that they're willing to help other people get where they are from where those people are as well. That's what's gonna get us out of this.
Right, right. It's becoming more and more mainstream to see that the people are not in control of this country. Perhaps I'm in a sort of ideological echo chamber, and I'm just seeing reflections of my own desires. But I think things like that are becoming more mainstream. Heck, even back to Alex Jones, even after this recent attack on Syria, his reaction, I'm sure you saw it. He was pissed. I mean, he even went to my shock, he even went as far as to say "fuck Trump." That was a beautiful tirade, and I hope that he's going back to his more anti-establishment roots. But I'm not going to keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if he does, it won't stop me from thinking that he's, just basically a shill, because, like, essentially, yeah, if he goes back to his anti-establishment roots, it would be better for the anti-establishment because they'd have, a sort of spokesperson, but then he could basically say whatever he wanted and the anti-establishment would run with it. So maybe that would be a controlled opposition as well. I don't know.
Right, right. So perhaps I'm out of place in doing this, but could you express to the listeners the intent of the anti-war chat that we're involved in?
Oh, that's fine. So this is going to be a chat. I'll post a link in the description for this for the podcast and the video. It's a chat for anybody who's interested in serious anti-war activism. We have a section for targets. We have a section for actions. We have essentially enough rooms, enough specific points of information that they can really sink their teeth into anti-war activism. And I wanted it to be nice and accessible, which is why I put it on Discord, even though it's not the most secure platform. And I'll be getting a Telegram for like more sensitive messages, and I already have a Wicker. If you want to send anything to my Wicker, at Insanity is free. If you just want messages that'll self-destruct. But if you do want to send me a self-destructing message, send it during the daytime Pacific time, because otherwise, I might not get to it in time. But yeah, this chat is designed to get people into anti-war activism. It's going to be designed to get people on board and active instead of just being like on the sidelines. And that's where I met. We follow each other on Twitter, and we have for a while. But this is where I really met Sans Latat, or Matthew King. Go ahead.
Oh, it's very appealing to me, this chat, the anti-war chat on Discord, because the sort of classical anti-war left, around the time of the Vietnam era, they're gone. Where are they? The left and the right are completely unified now, and I'm an anarchist. If I wanted to say things in the style of Adam Kokesh, I would say I'm a voluntarist, because there's a lot of negative connotations affiliated with the word anarchist, but I'm not ashamed to say it at all. So when I speak in the left-right paradigms, I'm speaking from a perspective of practicality. because there is a problem that we're facing right now, and it's that there are war hawks in Washington right now trying to send kids to war. World War III might be starting even. We don't know. I'm only speculating. I mean, things are, if you studied foreign policy and geopolitics, you can see World War III might actually be starting. And there is no anti-war left. It's astonishing. Where are they? I spoke to a highly liberal professor of mine just the other day, and I mentioned what just happened in Syria. And she basically said, well, Assad shouldn't have been doing this and that, which, mind you, these claims are still alleged. But she didn't say anything about, well, maybe we shouldn't go to war. We shouldn't send kids to war. She was really pro-establishment, pro-neocon, but she's a progressive leftist professor. It's terrible. So we need chats like this anti-war chat on Discord.
Well, and of course, I think, and we have a question in the chat on YouTube, but I think a good thing to mention is that if you were only on the left because there was a Republican in office, and if you were only anti-war because there was a Republican in office, then you were never part of the anti-war left. If you oppose war, you oppose it no matter who's in office. Right. And that's the reason, in order to get the initial support for this chat, I posted this tweet that said, retweet this if you'll oppose war no matter who's president, because that's what really counts. Being on the anti-war left is worthless. Being anti-war is what counts.
Yes.
Right. And the anti-war left, they were real big under Bush. All these fucking bands came out with their anti-war albums, and all these anti-war movies came out, and it was a great time. And it was like, fuck Bush, he's dumb, he's a monkey, which is interesting on its own, because most of these people would say that calling somebody a non-human animal is fascism unless they do it.
Right.
But it's very valuable to remember that consistency requires the ability to make personal sacrifice, and if you are willing to make that personal sacrifice, then maybe that might come with sacrificing your political affiliations, to join an anti-war movement, to be opposed to the system before the system grows to a point where it can't be opposed. Go ahead.
So, well, if I could take things to a kind of a different level, I don't believe that violence should be used as a means of getting your way. I think the non-aggression principle is an amazing foundation for anarchism. Just simply, for those who don't know, simply do not force or coerce anybody to doing anything. Everything should be voluntary. That being said, being nonviolent in that regard doesn't mean that one should not be able to defend oneself. So I'm absolutely vehemently advocating for arming yourself, learning how to shoot guns. I'm just going to say it plainly. Learn how to shoot, buy some good equipment, and train to the point where you're proficient. And that would distinguish you from, as a responsible gun owner, from an irresponsible gun owner, actually being proficient with your weapon. And this ties into the Marine Corps stuff. That's where a lot of this stems from. You were going to say something?
I said, well, right.
Oh, okay.
You're absolutely right about that. I mean, gun control should be being able to hit your target and nobody else.
Right, exactly. Now, that being said, the assault weapons ban of 2018 is upon us. I think it has a good chance of passing. Some would argue otherwise. So this is where I'm going to plug Cody Wilson. He's also an anarchist. I don't want to slap any more labels on him, but simply put, he's an anarchist. He runs Defense Distributed, and I'll show you here. He makes this machine called the Ghost Gunner. And essentially, you take an 80% completed lower receiver, you put it in the machine, which is plugged into your computer, and it makes a firearm, essentially. What is the legal part of the firearm, the lower receiver? And no one knows about it because these 80% lowers are, they're not regulated. It's paperweight. So you can take a chunk of aluminum, and then when you put enough money into it in time, then you can get this. So there's nothing illegal about it. It's There's no registration, there's no serial number. It's perfectly legit, and it's a legal way to subvert the state. And should things get worse, should the assault weapons ban kick in, should World War III kick off, or something else, who knows? You might need a machine or know someone who has one, but there are laws that complicate things there if you use someone else's machine. So look into that. But I think I look at anarchism from the perspective of you also need to be well armed, not just well educated. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, because without the ability to defend what's in your skull, what's in it doesn't matter.
Right. Right. It's like the First and Second Amendment are forever intertwined. They're married, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and you know, because we have a question in chat. I'm not sure if they're still watching because we have fairly low viewers right now. But Dominic asks, "Do you think there is ever a just cause to go to war?" Which is an interesting question that sort of ties into that.
I have talked about that with friends quite a bit, though. So, no, to go outside of your boundaries, what is your land, if you will, to go to war? No, absolutely not. But to be engaged in war and combat and physical violent conflict is okay. I'm not I don't think pacifism is the answer, utter pacifism, because then you wouldn't defend yourself. Now, okay, so violence, I'll put it in these terms. Violence is acceptable, in my opinion, only when there is an absolute imminent threat to you and those around you. But to go outside of your area, your country, what have you, to go to war, no, absolutely not. Some might say that World War II is justifiable. Things get kind of gray there because the Nazis were a huge threat. I'm not a historian, so I couldn't analyze that and say, well, that was actually justified. I don't know. But generally speaking, no, only in self-defense, actual self-defense, not preeminent self-defense.
Right. And, because if you want to talk World War II, the U.S. involvement was spurred by Pearl Harbor, which they let happen.
Yes.
And, World War I, it was spurred by the Lusitania, which, shocker of shockers, they let happen. And so all these wars, 9/11, they let happen. All these wars that the U.S. somehow has to get involved in is always the result of something they just, whoops, I guess we're in war now. And
right.
so then they go to war and they basically have like an invasion of another country. And then fucking Americans wonder why they have enemies, why the globe treats Americans as lazy slobs. Well, maybe it's because from the comfort of their homes, they say, yeah, fight those motherfuckers. And they don't know who those motherfuckers are.
Right. And as you said in that video that I mentioned of yours earlier, we've always been at war, always. Now, you don't know about most of them if you haven't read into it. Was it A People's History of the United States? Maybe it was a different one. There's some literature out there that talks about all of the wars the U.S. has been involved in all around the world. I mean, not to mention clandestine operations, just overthrowing governments. So, sending their people to war with their own governments, if you include those. I mean, geez.
Yeah, and I mean that then the fucking pedants will come out of the woodwork and say, well, I don't call that a war because the two countries aren't officially fighting. There hasn't been a declaration. And then you just realize that those sorts of people need to shut the fuck up and realize that a war is a war, even if the official parties don't call it a war.
Right. I mean, I could imagine, I'm 29 right now. I could imagine down the road, I'm starting to get real old and I've got a 17, 18-year-old son or daughter and they're talking about enlisting in the military. I'll do everything in my power to make sure they don't. I mean, not just for their own life from a sentimental perspective, but also because we would be supporting killing people who are just defending their country or their land.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention that, but a lot of those people are like defending their land as a result of, invasions that have happened prior and rebels that the US has armed. And, I mean, the fucking Soviet Afghan conflict, I bring it up regularly because it's a really good example of the US creating the quote enemy, the Mujahideen that they've literally armed and funded, and pointed at like Russia, saying, here, God is on your side. We believe God is on your side. Go, shoot these Russians. And then, they shot the Russians, and then suddenly there was a bunch of groups in the region that were empowered to shoot people because God said so. And we have things like Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, ISIS, all these terrorist organizations that are just suddenly, quote, here, out of nowhere, and the US still perpetuates that lie, that obvious lie. It's amazing.
It really is. It's amazing that people still fall for it. What's happening in Syria and with the rise of the Islamic State, my gosh, there's been an insurmountable degree of insurmountable. Sorry, I can't speak. There's been so much research and journalism on that subject. If you look at the Arab Spring, this series of faux revolutions, a series of dominoes falling as per American foreign policy. If you look into the Project for a New American Century, and I mean, they had all this lined up, or outlined rather. When the domino came to Syria, Assad by then knew what was going on, and he's like, it's not going to happen here. So we started funding these so-called moderate rebels, right? And they turned out, like al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, if I'm saying it right, I hope. A lot of these groups that had al-Qaeda ties already were funding these moderate rebels, and as soon as it was exposed that they weren't moderate at all, the mainstream media just stopped talking about it altogether. And then some kind of, I don't know, behind the scenes, I don't know the details, but all of a sudden the Islamic State, this old dead ideology, was resurrected, just the most extreme. It's like Wahhabism on steroids, and now that's the new enemy. That Russia has been fighting more than the United States. It's just amazing. It's all these proxy wars, and we're advocating for proxy wars right now with a major world power. It's absurd.
Yeah, and I don't think that they're gonna stop doing the triple tap policy either. Let's bomb the area, let's bomb first responders, and then let's bomb whoever gets there soon afterward. Let's just bomb literally everybody by putting down 3 strikes, and it's just a video game. It's just bullshit.
Mm-hmm. The propaganda involved in that is it's amazing. The white helmets, for example, in Syria, they're viewed as like a humanitarian group, organization of people, but really they're working for these Islamic extremists. But then when Assad perhaps attacks the white helmets, it's he's viewed as a monster, but really they are his enemy. We're digressing a bit too far. I don't know if you want to stay within the realm of philosophy, anti-war stuff.
Well, we do have limited time, so my thing that I was gonna say is, if you had one thing to say to anybody who was about to enlist, what would it be? How would you convince them not to?
I would ask them if they're okay with killing potentially innocent people. And if they're not okay with it, then they shouldn't sign the contract. That's really about that discussion would probably go a lot farther, but that's really the core of it, killing innocent people.
That's a really good way to start. I like that. And if anybody, because that's what I want to do. I want to encourage people to learn from people who've been there about why they shouldn't go. And I want to encourage people to educate their friends and neighbors, their family, anybody that they care about the fact that this isn't just a fringe ideology. This is something that comes from a very real place, and it comes from a very real set of people who were there and realized they shouldn't have been.
And the community of free thinkers, combat veterans who are against the war, anarchists, we're already a pretty large community, and we're growing rapidly. So let's let it be known.
And that's a good thing too, because the more people that are willing to proverbially defect, the more popular it has the potential of becoming. You know, if you go AWOL proverbially, if you leave the plantation, if you realize that this is a human farm and you don't want to be cattle, that's a good first step for most people anyway.
Yeah. Now going AWOL, or the Marine Corps calls it UA, unauthorized absence. There are severe ramifications for that for the individual doing it. There are other ways to get out, though. Administrative ways you can get out. They're not easy, but the ramifications are less. I recommend the latter route over the former, just for your own personal well-being.
Oh yeah.
But defect, as you said, in the sense that you should defect from this pro-war, pro-establishment ideology, and
right.
then see it for what it really is.
Well, defect from the state, really, because you can't support the state and not support war. You can't, like, and that's one of the things about the anti-war left, is that the reason they were really there was for free healthcare and shit similar to that, and they didn't realize that that came with drone bombing brown people overseas. They want to think that they can get one without the other. Well, there can't exist a welfare state without a warfare state, and they go hand in hand, because the purpose of the welfare state, it's a hugely untenable, you know, like monetarily, it's hugely untenable, and it goes like further into debt every year. And the reason it exists is to keep the tax cattle happy and not revolting, so that they can continue to do what they really want to do. It's not in our interests, and there's no way that it could be in the interests of the common person.
Absolutely. That being said, I might sound like a hypocrite. I'm going to college and I'm using the GI Bill, but the benefits are there. I'm using them. So I suppose you could say I'm getting this indoctrination, kind of using the state's, little rewards, little sprinkles that they gave me.
If I wanted to be a purist, I would say that anybody going to college is supporting the state, because essentially the college is just an college, university, whatever, is just an indoctrination system paid for by the state, so that the state can continue to indoctrinate people past the point when they're old enough to vote.
Yeah, it's interesting. The things that I'm doing in lectures, and essays are completely anti-establishment, anti-state. So it's a conflict for me to want to just keep going, even though I know it will have no effect on the career I want to do, investigative journalism. It's just I'm just doing it for now and seeing where things can take me. But I'm trying to get more involved with people like you and the anarchist and anti-war community.
Well, it's much appreciated. So I think that about wraps it up. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for telling the world your story, or at least the couple hundred people who listen to this.
Right.
And thanks for being candid and honest about it, because that's where the revolution is going to come from. It's going to come from people who are willing to be open and reasonable, because the state is neither of those.
I absolutely agree, and thank you very much for having me on here. It's been an honor and a privilege.
And it's been an honor and privilege to speak with you as well. Anybody else who is interested in being on this, especially if you're a veteran, if you worked for the intelligence apparatus, anybody who has anything that they can tell me, and tell the world, I want to hear from you. So just let me know. You can find me. If you need to send me a private message about it, so that we can talk about this on a more secure level, just wicker me at Insanity is Free. And yeah, I want to get this conversation going because that's the first step, is to educate everybody, to get the information out there and what people do with that. Episode 1 of the State Smash podcast. Signing out, I guess. Be well,
All right,
everyone.
talk to you later.